Get lumped up tonight. Listen to Rob Rossi and RockerMike on the only podcast that I'll hear. That won't make me wanna rip off my ears. Oh, the Rock Show, 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 the Rock Show. Oh, I want the Rock Show. The Rock Show, 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 the Rock Show. I want the Rock Show. Let's get lumped up.
Hello, people. Welcome to another exciting episode of The Rock Show, and we are talking about a legendary band. This is episode 155, and we're talking about the Allman Brothers Band. And Mike, I've seen these guys live a few times at the Beacon. I've been to some of those March Madness shows where they do that whole thing for the whole month.
That's
Like that
great.
show.
Yeah, they had that residency at the Beacon Theater for years. The Allman Brothers. Now, I have to say, I never saw them,
Oh, man.
and I kind of regret it a little bit. I've always kind of waffled back and forth with Southern rock bands like that. Sometimes I can sit down. It's good drinking music, but sometimes I can't get into it. But I do appreciate the Allman Brothers a lot as a band. What they went through, a lot of tragedy, a lot of fighting, a lot of problems, record label problems, anything that a band could have faced, pretty much this band faced, and even just doing the research to put this show together, I was like, wow, there's a few things I didn't know before, and they really went through a lot.
Yeah, they also always had really good guitarists. Because they had a lot of band change, a lot of band.
Yeah, they had a lot of lineup changes because a lot of guys couldn't deal with the bullshit in the band. There was always a lot of infighting, and especially the idea of the Allman Brothers really was almost like a commune. Okay, like when they got together, they all lived together at first. Okay, for a while, through the first couple albums, worked together every day, practiced together, lived together, and then as fame kicked in, the relationship started to deteriorate. And it became kind of different factions arose. And it happens, you see it in the best of bands. But with these guys, they were crazy party animals, and it just really went off the rails several times.
There was nothing like going to see them live and watching a
I've heard
5-minute version of Whipping Post.
I've seen clips of that, and it's amazing. And like I said, I wish I could have seen them. Obviously, with Gregg Allman gone now, that's never going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, let's get into it because it's a really interesting, deep story.
Yep.
So they formed in Jacksonville in 1969 by brothers Duane and Gregg Allman, and also guitarist Dickey Betts.
Dickey Betts was a great guitarist.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind that the first, this is a little hard to understand. The first two records actually bombed. Okay. The second one did a little bit better than the first, but it wasn't until they put the live album called At Fillmore East out in 1971, which is now 51 years ago. Yeah. That they really took off. So they're one of these unique bands, and we've covered a couple of bands like this that actually made it because of live records. Kiss is one of them, and Cheap Trick. Was another band that really broke based on their live record, Live at Budokan in that case. But with the Live at Fillmore East, it just broke open, and they did things. They did everything the old-fashioned way. They really worked hard on their live show, and had that reputation as a live show.
Before, I
think that's why the live record broke them, because I think there was a sound that they had live that never really could be duplicated in a studio. Okay, you couldn't get that energy that you could get by being there, but the live record must have done it, because it really, did it for them. But the history goes back a lot of years. Duane Allman and his younger brother Gregg, they grew up in Daytona Beach in Florida, that area. And Gregg, actually being the younger brother, he picked up the guitar first. But Duane, the older brother, actually surpassed him. When he picked it up, he got into it. He dropped out of school. He was practicing all the time, getting lessons and all that kind of stuff. The two brothers would form a band called the Escorts. And that evolved into a band called the Allman Joys. Instead of Almond Joys, the Allman Joys. And that was in the
Here comes the Almond Joy.
the Allman Joys.
The Almond Joy.
But that was in the mid-'60s, British invasion, that kind of sound. And by 1967, the band had spent a little time in St. Louis, where they connected with an LA record executive based with Liberty Records out in California. Liberty Records, we talked about them a lot. They were signing a lot of bands at that time. Yeah. They actually turned down the Beatles. Remember we were talking about that?
That's insane.
Yep. Now, they ended up moving out west to record. And they changed their name again, this time from the Allman Joys to the Hourglass. Okay. And they cut 2 albums that didn't go anywhere. This is Duane and Gregg and some other musicians. I think they kind of had different guys at different times. You can actually go online on YouTube and look up Hourglass and see them. There was like some promo clips and little live things. To me, they sounded like the Guess Who. That's what they sounded like. Now, Duane Allman would leave the Hourglass and go back to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. He would relocate there and concentrate on being a session musician. I think that's what he was thinking of at that time. The 2 unsuccessful albums. I guess he figured he wanted to play, but he just couldn't get it together with a band. Plus, there's always easy money with that. Okay, and he was a very good guitar player. Now, Muscle Shoals had the famous Fame Studios there. Okay, and he was working for them. Gregg stayed behind, still under contract with Liberty Records, thinking that Liberty was going to give him a solo career. Okay, that he waited around. That didn't exactly happen. There was about a year that the 2 of them were apart, and but they got reunited in Miami when it was on a band called the 31st of February. That was the name of the band.
What a name of a band.
Yeah. And that included drummer Butch Trucks, who ended up being in the Allman Brothers.
Yep.
They cut some demos with him at that time, okay, when the 3 met in Miami. Now, at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Duane Allman became the main session guitar player there. Whenever they needed a guitar player, he was there. He worked with Aretha Franklin, King Curtis, and particularly worked with Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett was recording at the time, and Duane was in the studio with him, and Duane suggested that they do a cover of the Beatles' Hey Jude. And it ended up being top 30 hit for Wilson Pickett on the Billboard charts.
Wow.
And it would that if you've ever listened to that, it's a very good version of the song. I actually prefer it over the Beatles.
Oh, yeah,
and,
I never heard. I got to listen to it.
Yeah. And a lot of people were paying attention to Duane at that point. One particular person would be Eric Clapton, who he would befriend in a short time after that. like I said, the single went to number 23, and in the process of that, it ended up that Dwayne got a 5-year recording contract at Fame Studios to be the primary session guitar player. Dwayne recruited for the band that he was putting together, which was unnamed at this point. He had his brother, okay, but he also recruited Jai Johanny Johanson, who is basically known as Jaimoe, okay, on drums. And he heard of him on a demo, okay, that he heard, I guess, in the recording studio somewhere, and didn't know him and just looked him up, and they became fast friends. And Jaimoe actually moved in with Dwayne at his house on the Tennessee River.
Wow.
Okay, he had. Now, Allman also invited bassist Barry Oakley to the jam, and basically jammed with these guys. They were trying to put this band together. They also became quickly very fast friends. The group had immediate chemistry, and Dwayne's vision for a band was very different. He wanted to have 2 drummers, okay, which nobody really did that, okay, and basically 2 drummers and almost like 2 lead guitarists in a sense, okay, and they knew Phil Walden, who was trying to put together a new recording. A new record label, I should say. Okay, Phil Walden was the manager of Otis Redding. Otis Redding, unfortunately, had passed away around that time. He was also involved in other R&B acts, and he wanted to put together this label that would be a rock label, and they would be distributed by Atlantic Records. So that label would eventually be called Capricorn, and for the time in the 70s. That the Allman Brothers, through all the successes they were on that label, they were the band on that label that basically carried the whole label. I can't think of anybody else on that label that was as big as the Allman Brothers. I don't think.
Nobody.
Yeah,
there were other bands, but nobody had.
Yeah, they had some other rock acts, but it really, the Allman Brothers was the bread and butter. Dwayne and Jaimoe moved to Jacksonville in early March 1969 as Dwayne became frustrated with Fame. Okay. He was still doing session work, but he wasn't getting along with the management there. And basically, Jerry Wexler, who was the leader of the executive CEO, I should say, of Atlantic. Okay. He purchased Dwayne's bands, which would be the Allman Brothers. They didn't have a name yet. All the recordings and demos and stuff, he purchased them for $10,000 to get out of the contract of Fame.
Is that a lot of money?
$10,000 in 1969, yeah, but if you think about what he reaped, no. Okay, it's $10,000 to make $10 million.
Yeah.
No big deal. Now, Dickey Betts, who was the leader of Oakley's previous band, joined in with this group. The band was called The Second Coming. Also, the Butch Trucks, who was in The Second Coming, I should say, he hooked up with them too. So basically, this is the core of the Allman Brothers right here. You got Butch Trucks, Dickey Betts, Dwayne, Gregg, and Barry Oakley on bass. Okay. They would be cutting demos at this time, doing a lot of work, living together. Okay. And they had 2 drummers. You had Jaimoe also. Okay. So it was definitely a unique band. They also brought in the Second Coming's Reese Wymans to play keyboards. And Dwayne, Oakley, and Betts all shared vocal duties. Okay. Yeah. Now, the unnamed group began to do free shows in Willow Branch Park in Jacksonville with an ever-changing, rotating lineup. Sometimes they had different members in the band when guys couldn't play live for whatever reason. Dwayne felt that, his brother really should be the lead singer of the band. Okay. So what would happen is he would be brought in and Wyans would kind of be considered obsolete because Gregg could play keyboards too. You understand?
Yeah.
So Gregg left Los Angeles permanently. He gave up on his solo career, okay, and came back. And they, immediately started rehearsing. And on March 26, 1969, the group did a cover of Muddy Waters' "Trouble No More." They would start working on that. Great song, and they put a nice little twist on it.
It's a fantastic song.
Yeah, it is. Now, Gregg was a little nervous with this band. He liked the idea, but he was nervous playing among them because they were all very accomplished musicians. But Dwayne was persistent and said, "Gregg, you could do this. Sing your heart out. You got this." So 4 days later, they made their debut at the Jacksonville Armory, where they used to have a lot of shows, and they had to come up with a name to play. Okay, so they kicked around a few names. One that they almost picked was called Beelzebub.
Beelzebub. Imagine that.
Okay, imagine they did that. Okay, Beelzebub.
Beelzebub. That's a
But they settled.
name.
They would settle on the Allman Brothers Band, which made a lot more sense. The group would move to Macon, Georgia, around May 1st, 1969. This would be their headquarters for a long time. And this was where Phil Walden was establishing Capricorn Records. Now, Mike Callahan and Joseph Red Dog Campbell became the band's early crew members. Red Dog was a disabled veteran who was getting disability checks every month and giving it to the band, basically to help them carry along because they didn't have anything. He would be a big part of their early years. He wrote a book, actually, and the name of it escapes me. But if you look under Red Dog Campbell, he has a book about that whole thing. Yeah. Gregg Allman has a very good book, too, about the band. In Macon, the band stayed at friend Twiggy London's apartment, okay? And that was
it's called the Legendary Red Dog, a Book of Tales.
Legendary Book of Tales?
About his early year as a roadie. In the movie Almost Famous, Jack Will played the character, Red Dog.
Yeah, right. There's that Red Dog character in Almost Famous, which is a great movie. Everybody should see that.
Yeah.
I like that movie. Twiggy's apartment was located at 309 College Street in Macon, and it quickly became known as the Hippie Crash Pad. Now, the band was basically broke, okay, and they were just practicing constantly, obviously not working much, and they didn't always have money to eat, but they made friends with the owner and cook of a soul food place in the area. Her name was Maria Louise Hudson, okay, and they would run a tab at her restaurant when they were low on money, and she would feed them, basically.
Wow.
So the group performed locally, and they practiced at Capricorn Studios daily. They formed a strong brotherhood, just being together all the time. It was 1969. They were consuming a lot of psychedelic drugs together. and they actually used to rehearse outside sometimes in a cemetery called Rose Hill Cemetery.
That's amazing. That was amazing. When I read that, I was like, Jesus Christ! Imagine you're all hopped up on some psychedelic.
You're writing songs in a cemetery. It's like a recipe for disaster.
That's like a trip. That's like a freaking trip.
If I was doing psychedelics, the last place I'd want to be is a cemetery. I don't know. But then again, who knows? You were thinking they're coming to get you. Their first performance outside the South was in Boston on May 30th and 31st, 1969, opening for the Velvet Underground, believe it or not.
Dude, that's
a crazy pair up right there.
Brother, the Velvet Underground, that sounds like What the fuck?
And they were opening for the Velvet Underground.
That's insane.
Yeah, I imagine that. Yeah, I could picture like the Velvet Underground crowd not liking them too much.
Oh, hell no.
No, and they didn't really have a following at that point in Boston, so that must have been a tough show. But in need of more material, they kind of started working on old blues songs like Trouble No More, a song called One Way Out, which they would work on. And they had improvised jams, okay, such as the Mountain Jam. That was one song. I mean, they were known for their instrumentals, too, the Allman Brothers. Gregg, who had struggled to write songs in the past, started to write more and more, okay? And he eventually became their sole songwriter, pretty much, in those early years. Quickly he wrote tracks like Whipping Post, Black-Hearted Woman, okay? These would all end up on the first 1 and 2 albums. The band was originally set to record their first record in Miami with Cream and John Coltrane producer Tom Dowd. That's who they wanted to get.
Wow.
But he proved to be unavailable, unfortunately. So they had to go to New York City in August of 1969 to work with Atlantic Records house engineer Adrian Barber on his very first production credit. It was the first album he ever produced. The self-titled Allman Brothers Band album was recorded and mixed in 2 weeks and was a pretty good experience for everybody. New York City, I guess it was their first time there, I'm assuming. It would really be kind of become a second home for them. Okay. The debut record was released in November of 1969 through Atco, which was Atlantic, and Capricorn Records, but it only sold a little less than 35,000 copies.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's pretty bad.
So it didn't do too well nationally. But after this commercial failure, they suggested that some record executives were getting on them saying, well, you should move out of Macon and move up to New York City and kind of get in the mix and get acclimated to the record business. But they had an attitude, well, we're not going to act like rock stars yet. We're not rock stars. Okay, we're just starting out. We're trying to get it together. And they liked being down in Macon. At least at that point, they liked being based out of there. So they rented a $165 a month farmhouse, and they called it Idlewild South. Okay, and Idlewild was the old name of JFK Airport, so I guess they were referring to New York with that by saying, something New York South. So much of the music presented on their second album, which would be called Idlewild South, okay, would originate from that farmhouse. With all their rehearsals and everything, they would come out with a second record. By March 1970, they would move to a Tudor-style home in Macon that they also nicknamed the Big House. Now, the Allman Brothers would play continuously in 1970, performing over 300 dates on the road.
That's traveling.
Yeah, traveling in a Ford Econoline van.
Wow.
And later, they purchased a Winnebago motorhome type thing, wreck vehicle, okay? And they nicknamed it the Windbag.
I love the names.
Yeah, it's funny. Now, Walden was beginning to doubt their future. He was managing them, but he was like, I don't know what's going to happen with these guys. Are they ever going to catch on? But what was happening on that second tour is that, a big national tour they were kind of doing, 300 dates. That's almost every night. All right, that's only 65 nights off out of the year. Okay,
yeah, that's crazy.
That's crazy, and you're in a van driving all over the place and a Winnebago. But what would happen is they would start getting, especially up and down the East Coast and in the South, they would get this reputation as a live act that you got to see. So with that, they were noticing that the crowds were getting bigger. They were starting to be able to play bigger venues.
Yeah.
And things were moving up, even though commercially they weren't selling a lot of records. Now, spending a lot of time in the Winnebago, okay, it kind of, led to a lot of debauchery. Okay, and drug use was starting to get kind of heavy. Okay, and everyone except Dwayne and Gregg were really struggling financially. Dwayne and Gregg had a little bit of a music career before. Okay, probably had a few dollars stashed. Okay, and remember, Gregg was the main songwriter. Okay, now their friend Twigs London, who was their tour manager.
This is crazy.
Yeah, this is the craziness of the road, especially in those days. He stabbed and killed a promoter for not paying the band. Okay. Now, he later pleaded temporary insanity. Now, I don't know how he got away with it. Okay. I get no idea. But later that year, Dwayne also accidentally overdosed on some opium after a show. So there's starting to be some problems here. Okay, a little bit of craziness. Now, Idlewild South, the album, would be produced by Tom Dowd. They will be able to get him for that. And it was recorded gradually over a 5-month period while they were touring and being in various cities. It would be recorded in New York, Miami, and also Macon, Georgia. Midnight Rider was recorded for this record, which is one of my favorite songs by them. And also the song In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, which is a fan favorite.
Yeah.
Idlewild South would be released in September of 1970, and it did a little bit better than their first record. Yeah. And based on the reputation of them as being a great live act. Now, after finishing the album, Tom Dowd would put Dwayne Allman in contact with Eric Clapton because he had worked with him for Cream. Okay. And they started to jam together. Eric was getting the Derek and the Dominoes project together, and they hit it off. Clapton turned out to be a fan of Dwayne's guitar playing because he had heard the Hey Jude version of Wilson Pickett with him on guitar and was impressed by it. So they got along very well, and Clapton actually offered Dwayne to be in Derek and the Dominoes.
Wow.
Okay. He could have played on Layla. Okay. But, he thought about it, gave it some thought, but he decided he wanted to stay with the Allman Brothers and do his own thing. And Clapton understood, and they stayed friends. Yeah. In the end, of course, like declining, he would stay with the Allman Brothers, but the recording sessions that Dwayne and Eric Clapton did were actually released later that year on an album called Layla and Other Assorted Songs. So that stuff was quickly put out.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest with you, I don't know if I've ever heard that. I have to check that out, what that sounds like. Clapton at that time was interesting. I'm not a big Clapton fan, but what he was doing then was pretty good.
Yeah, he was working with a lot of people, man. Also,
think
about that.
Yeah, he had just come. He had just 2 years earlier. He had just played on the Beatles' White Album.
Imagine Dwayne would have left the Allman Brothers, joined Clapton. That would have been.
Well, that would have been the end of the Allman Brothers. At that point, there wouldn't have been. But Derek and the Dominoes didn't last either.
No.
So and if you remember, they formed out of the George Harrison sessions for his solo album, All Things Must Pass. Yeah.
All Things Must Pass, yeah.
It's funny how all these things are intertwined, Now, through the course of 1971, the Allman Brothers' fortunes really began to change. The live shows they got hot. The live shows were taking off. So they just decided out of the blue, let's record a live record. Okay. They had 2 studio records under their belt. They were getting to be well known as a live act. Why not? So the album At Fillmore East was recorded over 3 nights, March 11th, 12th, and 13th in 1971. In total, they were paid $1,250 per night. So they made about $3,700, something like that, okay, over those 3 nights.
But that's actually pretty good,
Well, they had to split it. They had to split it several ways.
But
Okay.
remember, this is 71, 72,
Yeah.
which
And-
that's a lot of money.
And the film, yeah, and of course the album was huge. It went gold very quickly. It was actually a double album. Okay, and which some people forget because when you hear it on CD today, or if you hear it on download it, you don't realize it. But it actually was a double album, and it was sold as a single album though. It wasn't any more money, which was a good deal. Capricorn probably really and Atlantic probably took a little bit of a risk doing that. Okay, because double albums notoriously are expensive. Not just for the consumer, but for the people to make it. Okay, because everything is you're putting out 2 records basically, so you gotta.
Yeah, but think about you
press
take out
all
that
that.
record. You take out that record as a single. It's a price at 2 albums, but it's a single price at a single. Guess what?
Yeah.
Well, people are gonna buy it.
Yeah, who didn't Prince do that?
Yeah, I think Prince might have done, but
Wasn't like Sign of the Times a double, or 1999 was a double record, and they charged as one price, something like that.
But they might have been the Sign of the Times.
I think it was Sign of the Times.
Or Peaches and Cream, one of those.
I think it was Sign of the Times because I remember buying 1999. That was a double album, and I think that was more expensive. But Sign of the Times, I think he kept that down in price. But anyway, the double album was released in July of 71, and it took off on the charts right away. It peaked at number 13 and was certified gold by October of that year. It was really their breakthrough record, no doubt. Okay. It's also considered one of the greatest live albums ever. And I think if we ever get back to doing the live album, the greatest live albums that we did a few times, we might talk about what went into that, which was quite a bit.
We gotta do this one could be the making of also.
Yeah, like a making of, or if we do any more bunch of live.
If we do it, part 3, right? Part 3 of the best.
Exactly. Yeah, we had 2 parts, 5 each. It was like the top 5, right?
Yeah.
Each.
Yep.
Now, it's also considered one of the greatest live albums ever made by the Library of Congress, who has it down in their listings as a historical recording. Now, despite this huge success of At the Fillmore East, the Allman Brothers and some of its entourage now struggled with heroin addiction. Okay. Dwayne Allman, bassist Barry Oakley, and roadies Robert Payne and Red Dog Campbell checked into the Linwood Bryant Hospital for rehabilitation in October of 1971. These things were typically about 3 or 4 weeks long. Okay. And on October 29th, 1971, Dwayne Allman, then 24 years old, was killed in a motorcycle accident. And it was only 1 day after he returned from rehab. All right. What happened to him was he was riding his motorcycle at a kind of high speed, high rate of speed, when there was a flatbed truck in front of him, and it was carrying a crane on the back.
Yeah.
And it stopped suddenly at an intersection, and he had to swerve to the left very quickly to avoid it. They don't know if he hit the crane, a little bit of the ball and chain that would hang off the crane, or if the motorcycle hit the flatbed, but he was launched in the air. The bike was launched in the air, and the bike came down on top of him.
Killed him.
Okay, well, no. The speed, he must have been going fast. He didn't get killed at that point. When the bike went on top of him, it pushed him about another 90 feet. That's far. Okay.
That's far, man.
And to be pinned under the bike. I don't know how fast he was going, but he must have been flying. And he was taken to the hospital. He was alive, but they did some emergency surgery on him, but too many of his inner organs were crushed, and he would die a few hours later.
That bike pretty much killed him, man.
Well, I mean, I don't know how he was launched in the air, probably just coming down, and he wasn't wearing a helmet.
He's like he didn't snap his neck.
He could have. It could have been a whole bunch of things.
You would think the band would be over after Dwayne died.
No, but they held a meeting, and they got together and they said that they wanted to continue. They felt that they were kind of disciples of Duane Allman, that he had taught them things. No. Okay, and they felt that they had a lot to give.
Think about it, 24. He taught them and they were disciples already at 24.
Yeah, and he already had. Think about the career. He had the live album, 2 Allman Brothers records, 2 records from the Hourglass and before, some singles. Okay, so he was pretty accomplished by 24. Some people could only wish for something like that by the time you're 50. But he lived hard. And he got out of rehab. He was sober. Okay, and.
Didn't at one point even Gregg Allman was saying the Allman Brothers? There was just guys called the Allman Brothers that were playing.
Well, yeah, I mean, from this point on, it would only be Gregg Allman.
Yeah,
there'd be no more brothers in the band.
Yeah, there were no more brothers.
Yeah, they just kept it because of the tradition of it.
Yeah.
They wanted to continue on, so what they did is. They decided to record another record, just jump back on their horse and do that. And that album would be called Eat a Peach. All right. Great record. It was released on February in February of 1972. Now, it was their second hit record in a row. It got to number 4 on Billboard Top 200.
Wow.
Technically, it did better than the live record. And they would perform 90 shows in the following year as a 5-piece. Okay, without Dwayne, they didn't replace him. Okay, the band also bought 432 acres of land in Juliet, Georgia, for $160,000, and they nicknamed it the Farm. It soon became the main hangout for everybody.
Yeah.
And
the big house, the farm.
and it's made their bass player Oakley very happy because he wanted to kind of live like that with the whole band together. Okay. And, but Oakley was not doing so good. Okay. He had struggled with drugs and everything too. But he was, drinking a lot excessively. He was back on drugs. He was also losing weight very quickly. Friends basically said he wasn't dealing well with the death of Dwayne. Yeah. He kind of wanted to get high, be high, and stay high. That's really what they said he was into. Now, on November 11th, 1972, in a twist of fate, he would be on his motorcycle, a little bit lumped up, okay, but he was also in a good mood because he had just gotten through a jam session with the band that went very well, okay. But he was lumped up, and he crashed into the side of a bus on his motorcycle about 3 blocks from where Dwayne had been killed.
Dude, how crazy is that?
Yeah. Okay. Now, he didn't die from that. Okay. He shook it off and refused any medical treatment. He didn't go to the hospital. But later on that night, he became delirious, and he would be taken to the hospital where he would die from a basically cerebral swelling, which is brain swelling from a fractured skull. So he had a fractured skull from the accident, and he didn't do anything about it.
Wow.
That's really sad because that probably could have been preventable.
Yeah.
And again, no helmets in those days. I don't know if there's any states that don't have helmet laws anymore. I'm not sure. You got to wear a helmet now.
Yeah, wasn't like the football player Big Ben? Didn't he get into a car accident? Wasn't wearing a helmet also?
A motorcycle accident? Maybe. I don't remember.
I think the last one was Big Ben. I don't think that monster was wearing a helmet either.
How long ago was that?
Oh man, this is maybe like 6-7 years ago when he was like, he just won the Super Bowl and gets banged up.
Yeah. Wow. Well, football players, they get those head injuries anyway, even with the helmets.
Yeah.
But Oakley would be buried directly beside Dwayne, okay, at Rose Hill Cemetery. where they wrote all those songs.
That is wild, man.
Yeah.
That those guys, like, it's like it was meant to be.
Yeah. I mean, so much tragedy already in the band, and they're just really starting to take off. The Allman Brothers Band once again decided to carry on. Okay. And that was, of course, in the face of tragedy, they would carry on. They auditioned bass players, and they settled on Lamar Williams. He was an old friend of drummer. Jai Johanny Johanson's. Okay, he was a Mississippi native, and about 2 years out of the army. There was a guy named Chuck Leavell who was playing piano on Gregg Allman's solo record. Gregg Allman put out a solo record at that time. And he was starting to contribute more and more with the actual Allman Brothers Band. So he became a member of the band as well. Dickey Betts, at this point, was starting to become a leader in the band, okay, and writing more and more songs. Their next album will be called Brothers and Sisters, and that was a big success. That peaked at number one, and it had the big hit single Ramblin' Man, which got to number two. Yeah, which got to number two. I'll just tell you a little funny thing with that song. For my whole life, whenever I hear that song, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I guess I'm crazy, is there's a scene in The Exorcist where the two priests are talking in a bar drinking beer, and the Ramblin' Man is a song in the background. And you hear it prominently, while they're talking. And I always just think of like two priests getting lumped up listening to that song.
Just that visual alone, man.
Yeah, it's funny. Now, they would begin returning to touring again and playing a lot larger venues than they had ever played, making more money, okay? But as a band, they were suffering from a lot of miscommunications, a lot of misunderstandings, and more drug problems. This came to a head when backstage there was a brawl when they played with the Grateful Dead at Washington's RFK Stadium in June of '73. The brawl resulted in the firings of 3 longtime roadies. There was just a lot of problems between their crew and the band. Everybody was just not getting along. They were also making $100,000 per show in those days.
Wow.
Okay. Now this allowed them to rent the famous Starship. Okay. The Starship was a customized Boeing 720B jet plane. Okay. That was used by everybody from Led Zeppelin to the Rolling Stones at times. Okay. And, Gregg Allman and the band, I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard that there was places like on that jet to hide drugs, like in case you got busted. Okay, there was like secret compartments and all kinds of shit. I'm sure Keith Richards had that put in.
That's fucking funny, man.
Yeah. Now,
put it in the compartment.
Gotta hide the dope.
Yeah.
And also that year, Gregg Allman and Dickey Betts released top 20 solo albums. Okay. Now, in July of '74. The Allman Brothers went to Europe for the first time. Interestingly, all right, they already had some hit records, but had never been to Europe. Mostly that was probably because of the gas crisis at the time. It was very expensive to fly over there. So they headlined 2 big outdoor events. One was in Holland and one was in the UK. The one in Holland was called the Summer Concert '74, and that was attended by about 20,000 people. And then the second one was much bigger. It was called the Bucolic Frolic, and that was on July 20th in Nebworth Park in the UK. And that was attended by about 70,000 people.
That's a big draw, man, especially in Europe that they've never been there.
Yeah, never been there, and yeah. Now, when they would come back from Europe in August, they would start recording what became the 1975 album Win, Lose, or Draw. Now, they were showing cracks at this point. The sessions didn't go that well. They were very disjointed. Gregg Allman was dating Cher at this point. Okay. The Allman Brothers were one of the biggest bands in the world. She was a big star. Okay. And he had moved out to LA to be with her. In fact, when they did the vocals for Win, Lose, or Draw, he didn't even want to go to Macon to do it. He did his vocals in LA and sent them over. The band members had grown apart, basically, and rarely when they played live did they even do sound checks or anything like that. So they were getting sloppy.
Yeah.
And they were acting like the rock stars that they didn't want to act like before, The band members basically said that, this was a high point. The only real high point at this time was when they played for a benefit for presidential candidate Jimmy Carter, who was actually a fan. Okay, he liked it. And but things would come to a head after an incident when one of their security guys would be in a drug bust. Guy's name was Scooter Herring, and Gregg testified against him. Okay. Which pissed off the other band members. They called him a rat. Okay. And basically, it was a large amount of cocaine, five different counts for distributing cocaine. And he originally got a 75-year sentence.
Wow.
Okay. But that got lowered, and then he would be pardoned by Jimmy Carter eventually.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pardoned by Jimmy Carter.
Now, Allman always maintained that Herring told him to take that deal. Okay. In other words, Allman would have went away too if he didn't take that deal to go against Herring. Okay. And Herring said that go ahead, take the deal. I'll take the fall. But it destroyed the relationship with him and the rest of the members for a while. Okay. They didn't want to talk to him. They just figured he was a snitch, and that was it. Now, as a result of this, the band would break up. Okay. And Lavelle Williams and Jaimoe played together in a band called Sea Level. Now, Dickey Betts formed a band called Great Southern, and Gregg Allman started the Gregg Allman Band. Okay, so they kind of went separate ways right after that trial. They would put out a live album, an Allman Brothers live record at that time in 1976 called Wipe the Windows, Check the Oil, Dollar Gas. And that was released in an attempt to save Capricorn Records because Capricorn just lost their cash cow in the Allman Brothers, and they needed to have a hit record to put it out. Now in 78, this would be 2 years into breaking up. Gregg Allman and Phil Walden approached Dickey Betts about the idea of a reunion. Now, their first public appearance together came at a Great Southern show in Central Park that summer. Allman, Trucks, and Jaimoe joined for a few songs. Williams and Lavelle declined. Okay, they didn't want anything to be involved with that. Yeah. So they hired guitarist Dan Toller and bassist David Goldflies from Great Southern to join the Allman Brothers Band. They got back with producer Tom Dowd to cut an album. It was called Enlightened Rogues. And Enlightened Rogues was an expression that Dwayne Allman used to describe the band. He called them Enlightened Rogues.
That's a pretty cool name.
Yeah, pretty good. The album was a minor hit, and the band admitted that even though they tried, the chemistry really wasn't there yet. Okay. In fact, Dickey Betts filed a lawsuit against Phil Walden and Capricorn Records for non-payment of record and publishing royalties. Now, Betts' lawyer, Steve Mazarski, became the manager of the group. Okay, at that point, they cut ties with Phil Walden. at that point, Mussorgsky wanted to get them signed to a label. He had connections at Arista Records and Clive Davis over there. So they signed the Allman Brothers Band. And right away there was a problem because Clive Davis kind of wanted to change their sound. They wanted to make them more like a Southern Led Zeppelin type band.
But they weren't that kind of band, you know?
No, they weren't Zeppelin-esque in any way. Great musicians, great guitar players, as good as Zeppelin, but just not in that sound at all. And he started to bring in outside producers, which was something that they wanted to work with Tom Dowd. Okay, but Clive Davis wouldn't let it happen. Now, the first Arista effort was called Reach for the Sky, and it was released in 1980. The album was produced by Nashville songwriters Mickey Lawler and Johnny Cobb. Singer Bonnie Bramlett, famous country singer, was touring with the Allman Brothers, actually sings lead on one of the songs on that album. Mike Lawler soon became part of the Allman Brothers backup band, playing what was called a keytar. And to be honest with you, according to fans, that sucked. Okay. You know what a keytar is, right? It's a keyboards on a guitar.
Oh, I've seen them.
You've seen it. Yeah. That has got nothing to do with the Allman Brothers. Okay. Drugs was still a problem for the band. Okay. Particularly with Gregg Allman and Dickey Betts. Unfortunately, on Reach for the Sky, there was no hit single. And basically that was because the Southern rock genre was kind of waning at that time. If you think 1980, there really wasn't much of that around anymore, at least not in a big way. You still had bands like Molly Hatchet and stuff like that playing, but they were playing little clubs and things then, you know. The band would fire longtime roadie Red Dog Campbell at that point and started to kind of grow apart again.
Wow.
Over differences about business affairs and things like that within the group. Manager Mussorgsky was becoming tired of the band. He slowly was easing himself away because he called it $1 million headache and a $250,000 job. Okay. So it wasn't worth it for him. So their second and final album for Arista was called Brothers of the Road, and it was released in 1981. They collaborated with name producer Jack Ryan, who had worked with Styx and the Doobie Brothers. And just hearing that, I think that this guy would have no idea what to do with the Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
You know, Styx was about as far away from country rock as you could be. And the Doobie Brothers, I don't know. Anyway, he pushed even harder to change their sound, okay, which did not go over well. The single Straight from the Heart, though, was a minor top 40 hit, and it would be the last, song that they would ever have in the top 40. The group began clashing with Clive Davis a lot at this point over their sound. And they decided to break up over this. They said, nah, it's not worth it. Okay. We're just, not selling a lot of records, and they want to change our sound. We're going to go separate ways.
They want to change the sound. I don't understand that.
I don't know. What's funny is another band we're going to get to at some point, Foghat. Okay.
Oh, yeah, they had that problem.
They had that problem late in their career, around the same time, 1980, because of new wave. And they actually tried to go a little new wave. And you listen to it, I actually like some of it, but most Foghat fans think it's awful. But they want to hear Slow Ride over and over. But I actually liked some of those records that they did. Like there's like two in a row that they did, like 80 and 81, that were like that. But that was, it was, people were trying to, the music industry was changing, sounds were changing. The 70s were over, so they were trying to come up with something new. And the Allman Brothers just weren't going to do that. And if you didn't get it, you were going to clash with them, So the last appearance they would do at this point was in 1982 on Saturday Night Live. and they would break up right after that. Now, over the next few years, members would play together live at shows. They had projects that they were working on, and they would play together. Gregg Allman in 1987, you probably remember this, he had that hit song, I'm No Angel.
Yep.
Okay, and that kind of reinvigorated his career again.
Yeah.
Now, they celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1989, and the band reunited for a summer tour with Jaimoe once again on drums. In addition, they featured Warren Haynes and pianist Johnny Neal from the Dickey Betts Band, and bassist Alan Woody, who was hired after open auditions at Trucks Studio in Florida. There was new interest in the band after a multi-CD box set came out. It was called Dreams.
Yeah.
And Epic Records, who had signed Gregg Allman for his hit solo record in 87, signed the band. Okay. Now, Danny Goldberg became the band's manager. Danny had worked with Led Zeppelin in particular and Bonnie Raitt. Red Dog was back as a roadie for that tour.
Let's get the band back together, baby.
Exactly. Now, in 1990, they would see a reunion with producer Tom Dowd again, and they produced the record 7 Turns, which was a return to form. It was a pretty good record. The addition of Haynes and Woody seemed to kind of reinvigorate the band, re-energize them. And Neal, unfortunately, would leave in 1990, and they added percussionist Mark Quinones, formerly of the band Spyro Gyra, that following year.
Gyro, right?
They were like a jazz kind of thing.
Yeah.
The band performed 87 shows in 1991 and 77 shows in 1992. They didn't renew Goldberg's contract as manager, and as a result, their tour manager, Bert Holman, became their full-time manager, in 91. And he would stay with them for the remainder of their career. Their next studio album was called Shades of Two Worlds in 1992. It was produced, that album actually produced the song Nobody Knows, which ended up being a fan favorite. They also released a live album, An Evening with the Allman Brothers, First Set in 1992, and that was recorded at the Beacon Theater, where they had acquired, that's when they had started their residencies there, every year. The band would play a series of 10 consecutive shows at the Beacon every year in the spring for many years to come after that.
It was called the different March Madness.
The other March Madness, yeah.
The other March Madness.
It's true. I mean, for many years, you knew spring was coming when the Allman Brothers tickets went on sale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know guys that went every year. And they would tell me how great it was.
I think I went like 94, 95, and 96.
Okay. That was good times.
I won that time. And I remember I went to I at least got tickets for 2 shows.
2 shows back to back?
Yeah. No, like one week and then one following week. I'm trying to get like the last show. Go there to see like the first show and then you see the last show. You can tell the difference how by the last show they were ready to get out of there, but they were jamming for hours.
Isn't our buddy Big Mike, isn't he a big Allman Brothers fan?
Yeah, he probably gone to some of those Allman
Brothers. He likes those jam bands, the Dead and all that stuff.
We used to hang out with another group of guys, and they all loved the Allman Brothers. We would just go. We worked in this company, and one guy would always get tickets for all of us. You know
who's a big fan of the Allman Brothers is Vinny, who does the theme song. Yeah, he liked them. Yeah. Now, by 1993, things were getting contentious again within the band while on tour. Dickey Betts got arrested one night after shoving some cops. Okay. And basically, he was out of the band for a little while, and they had to find somebody. They replaced him with a guy named David Grissom from John Mellencamp's band. And then they brought in Jack Pearson, who was a Nashville-based player who was a friend of Haynes in the band. An interesting thing, and I remember when they did this, I remember reading about it, is they brought in Zakk Wylde from Ozzy Osbourne's band to play guitar for one gig. And it was a disaster because they didn't like his antics, his stage antics. I don't see how that would work, having Zakk Wylde and the Allman Brothers. But Betts would return in a short time. And their third post-reunion record called Where It All Begins was recorded live on a soundstage with no audience in 1994. The band continued to tour frequently, and they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995. Gregg Allman, I remember watching this. Gregg Allman was lumped up. Okay, I think it was one of the most lumped up speeches I've ever seen, and he couldn't even finish the speech. They just walked him off, and when he saw his performance, or his lack of performance, when it got broadcasted later, he was mortified. Okay, and he quit drinking and doing drugs.
Yeah.
He finally got himself sober. Now, he did it. Good for him. But during the 1996 run at the Beacon, Gregg Allman and Dickey Betts almost got into a fight that could have ended the show, okay, and canceled the tour. But, things were falling apart, and Haynes and Woody figured this is it for the band. So they left before they could even end the band, and they started Government Mule. Okay. Didn't they play together sometimes? Allman Brothers and Government Mule, I
think they had,
I think they did after that. Yeah. Now the group recruited Otile Burbridge, formerly of the Aquarium Rescue Unit, to replace Woody on bass and Jack Pearson on guitar. Concerns rose about loudness at this point. Excuse me, in the Allman Brothers. When I say loudness, I mean the band was Pearson had tinnitus, okay, and the loudness was mostly coming from Dickey Betts. So Pearson had to leave, okay, after the 1999 Beacon Theater shows, and Derek Trucks, who was Butch Trucks' nephew, 20-year-old nephew, came in on guitar. And he was very young, 20 years old, but he played a good guitar, and he was honored to get the gig, okay? Now, a live LP called Peekin' at the Beacon was released in 2000, and it's actually considered a horrible record, okay? It's not too much of the band shows at this time were really based around Dickey Betts and what he was doing, okay? And I think the band was feeling left out. So they wrote a letter to him, okay, and said that, for the summer tour, you're not with us, basically, okay?
Wow.
And, it was really the band said it was meant to be temporary. He would be back, okay? But he didn't take it that way. He got a lawyer, and he sued the band. And he got a cash payout, okay? And he went on to record new music with some other people, okay? And that would be it, okay? Now, they would go on, okay? Now, Jimmy Herring joined the band for that summer tour to replace Betts, but the negative press was out there, constantly saying, how can you have an Allman Brothers without Dickey Betts? There's no point, okay? And Jimmy Herring would leave after that because he just couldn't take that kind of criticism, So that August, former bassist Alan Woody, okay, was found dead in a New York City hotel room. Warren Haynes set up a benefit for his friend and bandmate, which included the Allman Brothers Band. Now, Derek Trucks was unavailable, so Haynes sat in on guitar for the gig. He would rejoin the band in 2001 for their Beacon Theater run, and he reportedly felt more comfortable in the band than he ever had, even at that point. In 2003, the Allman Brothers Band would release their final studio album, Hitting the Note, to critical acclaim. It featured Derek Trucks and is the only album that they have that doesn't have Dickey Betts on it.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Now, they would continue touring heavily through the decade, but by 2010, health setbacks set in when Gregg Allman had a liver transplant, and then in 2012, he had to go back to rehab for addiction to pain medications related to the transplant. David Frankie Toller died at a hospice care center, in Bradenton, Florida, on June 4th, 2011, after a long illness following his liver transplant at the age of 59. In 2012, the Allman Brothers started their own music festival called The Peach, and it featured many associated acts, some different genres as well, and they did 2 performances as the Allman Brothers Band. They played a run at the Beacon in 2013, as they always had, and after they would continue with more touring. In 2014, Haynes and Derek Trucks announced that they would leave the band at the end of the year. The group intended that their 2014 run at the Beacon would be their last, but the residency was cut short after a couple of shows because Gregg Allman developed bronchitis. However, in September of 2014, they performed their At the Fillmore East album, complete, at the Lock-In Music Festival in Virginia. Their final show would be October 28th, 2014, at the Beacon Theater, which was appropriate. The show was the 238th sellout Allman Brothers show at the Beacon Theater. The concert consisted of 3 sets, comprising mostly music from their first 5 albums. That must have been incredible.
Yeah.
Okay. But no Dickey Betts.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on January 17th, Butch Trucks, founding member of the Allman Brothers, died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And that May, founding member Gregg Allman died from liver cancer at the age of 69. And that basically put an end to the Allman Brothers at that point. And that was a couple of years later. So they had a great, amazing career, 45 years.
Do you see that thing that in January 2020, the surviving member of the final Brothers lineup, Allman Brothers, according to some of the brother, announced they intend to hold a concert to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the band on March 10th. The concert lasted 4 hours.
Yeah. But that was, who was in that band?
It was probably nobody, none of the brothers.
Nobody original.
Nobody. Yeah.
So, it's hard to count that. But yeah, they had a great run, especially early on. The 70s stuff is very good. Early 70s stuff is the best, my opinion.
Yeah, man. Wow. What a history, man. A band that I seen live a few times, man. Also.
Yeah.
What a great show, man.
Long, crazy history.
Let me tell you, there were performers, like when you saw them on stage that you would never think nothing was happening. And then there was just such fucking after the freaking shows were over.
And the fans were loyal, right? They were totally into it.
Oh, the band was loyal. The best thing is when you went to Allman Brothers concert, once the fucking lights lower, there was smokes everywhere. There was popping, smoking weed everywhere.
Time to light up.
Hey, so Mike, how do we get a hold of you if we want to reach out to you?
Okay, you can find me on Instagram, RockerMike212. You can find me on Clout Hub and MeWe as RockerMike. You can find me on Facebook as RockoMike, and then also on Facebook, the Rock Show podcast group page. Also, I will be going on Truth Social soon. More info about that.
Ooh, Truth Social sounds good. And you can find me on any social media with Getting Lumped Up, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So if you get something from Getting Lumped Up, that will be for me and the rest of the crew. And guys, thank you for your support. We'll be doing a lot more shows this year. Remember, it's a conspiracy show, a damn rock show, the new format for the whole Getting Lumped Up universe. And with
What a universe it is.
what a universe it is. And for all you people out there, please watch our new series.
The Son of Sam Chronicles.
The Son of Sam Chronicles, the series that people are talking about, and it's about 20 to between 15 to 20-minute episode, and you guys will enjoy it. And with that, I will leave you. Remember, don't get drunk.
Get lumped up.
See you next week.
Take care, people.
Podcast you will hear that will be music to your ears. You'll learn about bands you love or may not know, and it's only here on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show. Ooh, yeah, on the Rock Show. So tell your friends and everyone you know. Let's get lumped up on the Rock Show.